10 hours on a flight, no Wi-Fi, no distractions. I met a stranger, talked for hours, and somehow I fell in love. I noticed him the moment I sat down, not because he was striking, but because he looked just as unprepared for human interaction as I felt. Long flight, middle seat, no Wi-Fi. The kind of journey where time stretches until you stop measuring it. He smiled politely when I apologized for bumping his arm. I smiled back, expecting silence to take over. That is how flights usually work. You share oxygen, not stories. Then the seatbelt sign came on, and the screen in front of me confirmed what I already knew. Airplane mode, no messages, no distractions. Just time, 10 hours of it. He glanced at my screen and sighed softly. Guess we're stuck with reality, he said. I laughed, surprised by the sound of my own voice. That's dangerous. That was how it started. We talked about small things first, where we were flying from, why we were tired, how airplane food somehow tastes both bland and stressful. It was easy, easier than it should have been. Somewhere over the ocean, the conversation deepened without asking permission. We talked about work, then about the versions of ourselves we wanted to be but had not figured out yet. He listened in a way that made me forget I was usually careful. I found myself saying things I normally edited out. He told me about the city he loved but left behind. I told him about the one I lived in but never fully claimed as home. We laughed quietly so we would not disturb the sleeping strangers around us. Hours passed unnoticed. At one point, he asked me what scares me most. I answered honestly without softening it. He did not flinch. That felt rare. I noticed his hands when he talked, expressive but restrained. I noticed how he thought before responding, like words mattered to him. I wondered when I started noticing it all. The cabin lights dimmed, time blurred. The world outside the window disappeared into blackness. For 10 hours, nothing else existed. No past, no future. Just two people suspended between places, sharing thoughts like they were meant to be exchanged. Then the pilot announced our descent. Phones came alive, screens lit up. Reality crept back in. He turned to me and asked where I lived. I told him. He went quiet for a moment, then smiled sadly. Different country, he said. And just like that, airplane mode turned off. Have you ever felt deeply connected to someone you met by accident? When the plane landed, the silence between us felt louder than the engines ever had. People around us woke up, stretched, reached for bags, returned to their lives. I stayed still, suddenly afraid that movement would break whatever had formed in the air between us. He checked his phone. Messages flooded his screen. I did not ask from who. I did the same, then locked it again. Notifications felt intrusive now. We stood in the aisle waiting to move forward inch by inch. Our shoulders brushed accidentally, then did not move apart. It felt deliberate even though it was not. I don't want this to end like it didn't matter, he said quietly. I swallowed. It mattered. That was the problem. We walked together through the long corridor, surrounded by strangers reuniting and rushing. Our pace slowed naturally, as if the airport itself were pushing us apart. At immigration, the line split. Domestic. International. We stopped. He looked at the sign, then at me. So this is where paths officially divide. I tried to smile. It came out uneven. I hate that you're right. For a moment, neither of us moved. 10 hours of honesty stood between us, suddenly fragile in the face of geography. It felt unfair how quickly reality demanded decisions. He asked for my number, carefully, like it was a question he was prepared to accept any answer to. I gave it to him without hesitation. My hands were steady even if my heart was not. Can I message you, he asked, once we're allowed to pretend distance isn't real yet? I nodded. Please. There was an urge to hug him. I resisted it. Physical closeness felt too final, too memorable. I was afraid it would hurt more later. Instead, we stood there, looking at each other like we were memorizing details. The way his expression softened when he smiled, the tired kindness in his eyes, the familiarity that should not have existed yet somehow did. Then a voice called for passengers to move forward. He stepped back. I stepped back too. Safe travels, he said. You too? That was it. No dramatic goodbye, no promises. Just two people walking in opposite directions with something unfinished behind them. At baggage claim, my phone vibrated. A message from him. Still feels unreal that you're not next to me. I stared at the screen longer than necessary before replying. Same. The seat feels louder now. We messaged while waiting for bags, then while walking out, then while finding rides. Distance began immediately, but so did effort. Outside the airport, the air felt different, heavy, like I had left something important at 30,000 feet. As my car pulled away, I looked back at the glass building shrinking behind me. I did not know what we were yet. I did not know if this would survive time zones and reality. But I knew one thing, with uncomfortable clarity. Some connections do not need time to matter. They just need honesty, and we had given each other 10 uninterrupted hours of it. Would you try to keep a connection alive even if distance made it difficult? The first week after the flight felt unreal, like the ground had shifted slightly and no one else noticed. We messaged every day, not constantly, but intentionally. Short check-ins, long reflections. Time zones turned into small negotiations we learned quickly. I discovered that distance does not arrive all at once. It arrives in moments. When I reached for my phone beside me and remembered he was not there. When I wanted to point something out and realized the seat was empty. When a song played and I wondered if he would hear it the same way. He sent me photos of his city. Early mornings, coffee cups, streets I'd never walked but somehow recognized. I sent him photos of mine. Sunsets, crowded sidewalks, my favorite quiet corner near home. We were building a bridge out of images and words, hoping it could hold weight. One night we talked for hours. Not texting, talking. His voice sounded different through headphones. Softer, closer. It filled the space around me until my apartment felt less empty. We laughed about nothing. We paused comfortably. Silence did not scare us. At some point he said, "It's strange how real this feels." I agreed, then hesitated. That's what scares me. He understood immediately. He said distance had taught him to be practical, but meeting me had disrupted that instinct. I told him I had spent years avoiding anything that did not come with guarantees. We laughed at our shared caution. Reality returned in smaller ways too. Schedules, responsibilities. Days when replies were slower. Not because interest faded, but because life demanded attention. We learned not to panic during quiet hours. Trust began forming quietly. Friends asked about the flight. I told them it was fine. I did not know how to explain that something important had happened in a space that technically no longer existed. How do you describe a connection born between departure and arrival? One evening, he admitted he was afraid this would turn into a memory instead of a future. I did not reassure him immediately. I told him I was afraid too. Honesty felt better than comfort. We agreed on one thing: no pretending, no romanticizing what distance could become. We would take it as it was, uncertain, real, worth exploring carefully. That night, after we said goodbye, I lay awake thinking about the flight, about how safe it felt to talk without expectations, how rare it was to feel understood without explanation. I realized then that what we shared was not about proximity. It was about presence. And presence, I was learning, could travel farther than I ever imagined. Still, questions lingered. How long could this last? Would effort fade? Would reality eventually win? I did not have answers. I only had a feeling that refused to be ignored. Sometimes the hardest part of connection is not distance. It is deciding whether something brief deserves continuation. And I was not ready to let go yet. Do you think emotional closeness can survive physical distance? The second week taught me that longing is quieter than I expected. It did not arrive as desperation or sadness. It showed up in small habits. Checking the time where he lived, saving stories to tell him later, pausing before bed, knowing my day would end without his physical presence but not without his voice. We began scheduling calls, not rigidly, but intentionally. Something grounding about agreeing on a moment. It made the distance feel acknowledged rather than ignored. When I heard his voice ring through my phone, my shoulders relaxed before my mind could respond. We talked about ordinary things: what we cooked, what annoyed us, what we avoided thinking about. The lack of novelty made the connection feel real, sustainable, less like a fantasy built on scarcity. One evening, he asked me if I believed in timing. I thought about it longer than necessary. I said timing felt like an excuse people used when courage felt inconvenient. He laughed softly and said he wanted to believe that effort could bend timing, even if it could not defeat it completely. I noticed how carefully he listened. He remembered details I forgot mentioning. He asked follow-up questions that proved he was not just waiting to speak. That attention felt intimate in a way touch sometimes fails to be. Still, doubts appeared when the conversations ended, when the screen went dark and the room returned to silence. I wondered if connection without proximity was sustainable or simply poetic. I wondered how long anticipation could survive without resolution. One night, after a particularly long call, he said something that stayed with me. He said he did not feel like he was chasing something with me. He felt like he was walking toward it. That distinction mattered. It eased something in my chest I had not realized was tight. Friends began noticing changes in me. I smiled more. I listened better. I was less impatient with silence. They asked questions. I gave partial answers. Some things feel safer when they remain undefined. Distance tested us in unexpected ways. Misunderstandings took longer to resolve. Tone traveled imperfectly. We learned to ask before assuming, to clarify before retreating. That effort felt mutual, and that mattered more than ease. One day, he mentioned visiting my country later in the year for work. He said it casually, but the implication landed heavily. Possibility shifted from abstract to tangible. My heart responded faster than my logic. We did not make plans. We let the idea rest between us, acknowledged but unpressured. Hope, I was learning, works best when it is not forced into timelines. That night, I stood by my window, watching the city settle into darkness. I thought about the plane again, about how temporary spaces can hold permanent changes. I did not know where this was leading. I only knew that connection had changed the way I experienced absence, and that felt like something worth continuing, even without guarantees. Can effort and communication replace physical closeness in a relationship? Weeks passed, and the rhythm of our connection became familiar. Not predictable, but steady. Messages in the morning, calls in the evening, moments of silence that no longer felt threatening. We were building a language only we understood. One evening, I caught myself laughing aloud at something he said during a call. My roommate looked at me like I was strange. I did not explain. How do you describe laughing at someone who isn't physically present, yet feels closer than anyone else? We began sharing more than daily routines, childhood memories, first heartbreaks, dreams that had been postponed indefinitely. He described streets he used to wander as a kid. I described my favorite cafes, the corners I claimed as mine. Each story added texture, a map we could follow when visits were still months away. One night, the call stretched into hours, past midnight in my city and the early morning in his. The conversation became more honest than we had allowed before. He said things he had never admitted aloud. I said things I thought I would never say. It was thrilling, terrifying, healing. At some point, he asked about fear. I told him I feared things I had not yet learned to name. Loneliness, being overlooked, loving, and not being seen. He listened, not with pity, but with attention that felt like a gift. He said, I think I know what you mean. I feel the same, in my own ways. There was a pause, comfortable and full. Later, I noticed how small habits began to remind me of him. The songs I played, the streets I walked, even coffee tasted different when I imagined telling him about it. Distance was a presence now, shaping my thoughts and my days. One weekend, he suggested a shared experience, watching a film at the same time while video calling. We laughed through the bad moments, debated the plot twists, and reacted to scenes together. Somehow, it made the miles shrink. We started talking about the future in subtle ways. Not logistics, not dates, not flights, but desires. Where we wanted to grow, what we valued, how we imagined life if circumstances allowed it. The conversation was gentle, without pressure, yet profoundly binding. Then came the first test. A week when schedules collided, calls missed, messages delayed. My chest tightened in ways I did not expect. Fear whispered that distance would win, that our carefully woven bond was too fragile. He noticed. He called anyway. We spoke about it openly, acknowledging the discomfort without blaming. That honesty, simple as it seemed, reinforced the connection. It was a lesson in vulnerability, in trusting someone to stay, even when certainty falters. Before hanging up, he said, No matter what happens, I want you to know this. Our connection is real. It's not temporary just because the world says so. I stayed awake long after, listening to the silence of my apartment. For the first time, I realized that real love doesn't always arrive in grand gestures. Sometimes it arrives slowly, quietly, persistently, over time and space. And I understood that the distance, though real, was no longer a barrier. It was simply a measure of the depth that we were willing to explore. Do you think love can grow stronger when tested by distance? By the third month, our conversations had taken on a rhythm I didn't want to break. Morning texts became small rituals, evening calls stretched into late-night confessions. We talked about everything and nothing, finding intimacy in the ordinary. The miles between us no longer felt like empty space. They felt like a canvas we were both painting on carefully. One night, he asked me what I imagined for us. I hesitated, aware that words have power and distance magnifies every choice. I don't know, I admitted. I just know that I want this connection to last, whatever form it takes. He paused, and I could hear the thoughtfulness in his breathing. I feel the same. I don't want to force anything, but I don't want to lose what we've started either. That honesty surprised me, not because it was romantic, but because it was real. Most relationships collapse under the weight of expectation. Ours was growing under the weight of intention. We started sharing our routines, the mundane details that make life real. Morning coffee, crowded subways, favorite songs, bad habits. It was strange how knowing these small things made him feel closer than any physical proximity could. I caught myself imagining him in my city, walking the streets I knew, laughing at small jokes only we understood. Then came the first time I truly felt ache for him. A night when my call with him ended abruptly because of a time zone mishap. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the absence of him as if it were tangible. I realized how intertwined he had become with my daily rhythm without even being physically present. He noticed the next day. I can tell something's off, he said softly over video. I laughed to hide it, but he pressed gently. You don't have to pretend for me, he said. That phrase, simple, unassuming, felt like a lifeline. I told him the truth. That distance sometimes felt overwhelming, that longing could be sharp, almost unbearable. He didn't offer solutions or promises he couldn't keep. He just said, then we hold on carefully together. That night, I fell asleep imagining him in his apartment. The same sky stretched over both of us. It felt like a small miracle that the same stars could exist over two cities, over two lives, over two people slowly learning how to love without proximity. We began planning small shared moments, watching a sunrise via video, making the same meal and comparing notes, sending playlists back and forth. These tiny acts became symbols of our commitment. We were creating rituals that distance could not erase. And then, one evening, he asked the question I'd been waiting for but feared, do you want me to visit? I hesitated, feeling the thrill and the terror at the same time. Visiting would transform everything. It could solidify our connection or reveal cracks we hadn't seen yet. But I said yes. I wanted to take the risk. We laughed nervously through the plans, careful not to let expectation overshadow the anticipation. For the first time, the distance felt like a challenge we were actively choosing to meet, not a barrier that defined us. I went to bed that night with my heart racing, realizing that some love stories do not arrive with certainty. They arrive with courage, trust, and the willingness to cross invisible borders. Would you take a leap to meet someone you truly connected with online, even if distance made it complicated? The day he arrived felt unreal. I waited at the airport, heart thudding in a way it hadn't in years. I had imagined this moment countless times, but reality is rarely what imagination prepares you for. And yet, the second I saw him step off the escalator, every scenario I'd rehearsed vanished. He looked exhausted from the flight, but the tiredness didn't diminish the energy in his eyes. That same curiosity, the warmth I had come to recognize over calls and messages, radiated from him. It was as if the 10 hours we had shared in the air had stretched time differently, and now he was here, embodying all those hours. We hugged, carefully, as if testing the physical space between us. It was natural, easy, though a little electric. The world around us blurred. The announcements, the rolling luggage, the strangers moving past, none of it mattered. We walked to the car in silence at first. Neither of us needed to fill the quiet. Our presence alone spoke volumes. Then he asked if the city felt different from how I described it. I laughed, saying yes and no. Some corners were the same, yet my perspective had shifted, colored by anticipation. He nodded knowingly. Over the next hours, we explored small streets, wandered through cafes, and let conversation flow as it had before, except now it had texture, depth, and touch. I noticed the subtle things, the way he smiled when a memory amused him, the way his hand brushed mine accidentally, and how I didn't pull away. That night, we sat at a rooftop bar, city lights stretching below. The conversation softened. He asked me if reality matched my expectations. I hesitated. It's more than I imagined, I admitted. He smiled, relieved, and we sat quietly for a moment, letting the gravity of proximity sink in. We talked about the future too, carefully. Not in a pushy, overly planned way, but with honesty about what we wanted, what we feared. How would distance shape us now that one of us was temporarily here? How could we preserve what had been so fragile, so precious before his arrival? Later, he reached out for my hand. I didn't hesitate. It felt like confirmation, not possession. That night, walking back to the apartment where I was staying, I realized something. Presence does not always mean certainty, but it does magnify connection. Even as sleep came, I felt the tension of reality pressing against our shared bubble. Tomorrow, responsibilities would return, flights would depart, distance would reappear. But for now, the moment was ours. Before turning in, he said softly, no matter what tomorrow brings, I'm glad I came. I realized then that some moments, like some love stories, exist outside schedules, expectations, and borders. They exist in honesty, in courage, in the willingness to meet someone fully even when risk is unavoidable. For the first time, I understood that distance had never been a measure of our connection. It had been the test of how deeply we could commit to presence, however fleeting, however uncertain. Do you believe a connection can feel stronger when finally experienced in person after weeks of virtual closeness? The days he stayed were both ordinary and extraordinary. Ordinary because we walked streets, drank coffee, shopped at markets, but extraordinary because every ordinary act felt heightened. Every laugh, glance, and touch carried weight because it had been imagined, anticipated, and now realized. We fell into a rhythm, morning walks to the bakery, afternoons exploring corners of the city I rarely visited, evenings talking on rooftops, letting the city lights mirror our conversation. Each moment was ordinary, yet it vibrated with a quiet intensity. I noticed how differently I perceived him now. Over calls, he was familiar. Physical, however, added texture. The tilt of his head when listening, the slight hesitation before answering, the warmth in his hand when it brushed mine, it all felt tangible in ways text or voice could never fully capture. One afternoon, as we sat in a quiet cafe, he asked something I hadn't considered. Does meeting me change what we had? I looked at him, surprised. It's different, I said carefully. But not worse. Realness adds a new layer. It doesn't erase the connection we built. He smiled, relief softening his features. I was afraid reality would disappoint me. I didn't expect it to feel stronger. We spent that evening walking along the river, lights reflecting on water. Conversation flowed easily, sometimes lapsing into comfortable silence. At one point, he stopped, looking at me intently. I don't want to think about leaving tomorrow, he admitted. I felt the same. The thought of distance returning was heavy, but also expected. Our connection was stronger, but not immune. That awareness made each moment more deliberate, more precious. Later, back in my apartment, we spoke about what the future could look like. Not in terms of rules or logistics, but desire and intention. Could we make it work despite borders? Could we preserve what had grown naturally? Our words were tentative, careful, but honest. That night, lying awake, I replayed the flight in my mind. 10 hours. Conversations that had shaped the bond we now held. Distance had always been a challenge, but now it felt like an element we were prepared to navigate rather than a barrier we could not cross. I realized then that love does not always arrive in grand gestures. Sometimes it grows quietly, over calls, over messages, over imagined streets and shared meals. Presence, even when separated by miles, is powerful when mutual and intentional. By the last evening, we sat silently on the balcony, the city lights stretching beneath us. Words felt unnecessary, hands intertwined, hearts synchronized in a way that no message could replicate. When I finally went to bed that night, I did so with a sense of calm I hadn't known before. Distance remained, but it no longer intimidated. Our connection had survived physical proximity. It had evolved. I understood then that love can exist across time zones and borders if both parties are willing to hold it carefully, honor it honestly, and meet it fully when given the chance. Do you think physical presence can deepen a bond that began online, or is it always fragile? The day before he left, the city felt both intimate and infinite. We walked streets we had explored together before, but this time everything carried a subtle urgency. Each laugh, each glance, each moment of stillness felt heavier because tomorrow would separate us again. We stopped at a small park, the one near the river where the light fell perfectly in the late afternoon. He sat on the bench, hands clasped together, eyes searching mine. I don't want to leave this unsaid, he murmured. I nodded, not needing words yet feeling the gravity of them. 10 hours on a plane, months of messages, weeks of living moments together, they all led here. The connection we had was no longer abstract. It was physical, emotional, undeniable. He took a deep breath. Being here with you, it's different from anything I imagined. I don't want to think of distance as a problem anymore. I want to see it as a challenge we can navigate together. I smiled, feeling the familiar flutter of anticipation and fear. I feel the same. But reality isn't as simple as desire. He reached for my hand. I let him. Fingers entwined, warmth grounding us against the looming goodbye. There was a heaviness in the air, but also a strange sweetness. Moments that matter always carry a mix of joy and sorrow. We spent the afternoon talking about what we had learned about each other. His favorite childhood memory, my secret fears, the small quirks that make us who we are. For the first time, we were revealing the essence of ourselves not through messages, but through presence. Later, we walked back toward the apartment, each step heavy with awareness. He paused on the doorstep. I could see the hesitation in his eyes. I wish this wasn't temporary, he said softly. I wanted to say everything would be fine. I wanted to promise that distance wouldn't matter. But I knew the truth. Love this strong is powerful, but fragile when geography interferes. I could only offer honesty. Neither of us knows what tomorrow brings, I admitted. But this, what we've shared, it matters. It changes how I see connection, trust, and love. He nodded, understanding without needing further explanation. There was a quiet reverence in that acknowledgement, as if we had both internalized the gravity of what we'd created. The evening descended slowly. We lingered, holding hands, savoring silence. No words could adequately capture the mixture of happiness and dread, the weight of proximity, and the inevitability of separation. Finally, he left. I watched him walk down the street, the city lights reflecting on wet pavement, each step taking him physically further, but leaving an imprint that would remain. When the door closed, I felt the familiar ache of distance, but I also felt something stronger: hope, courage, and the knowledge that love can exist beyond borders if it is nurtured intentionally. As I lay in bed that night, I realized our story was far from over. Distance was a challenge, yes, but it was no longer an obstacle. It was a test of commitment, a testament to the connection we had forged in the skies and strengthened on the ground. Would you fight to preserve a love that thrives despite distance, or accept it as a beautiful memory? The morning of his departure felt heavy in a way I hadn't anticipated. The air in my apartment seemed thicker, quieter. Every movement reminded me that soon he would be thousands of miles away again, and the comfort of his presence would be replaced by the absence we had learned to navigate. We met at the airport, the same way we had on arrival, but now with the weight of goodbye pressing against us. He smiled, but it didn't reach the edges of his eyes. I tried to mimic the smile, but mine faltered too. 10 hours on a plane had led to months of messages, visits, laughter, and quiet moments, and now it was ending again for the foreseeable future. We walked together through the airport, shoulder to shoulder, hands brushing intermittently. Neither of us wanted to speak too much, knowing that words might break the fragile hold we had on the moment. Finally, he stopped near the gate. "This isn't easy," he said, voice low. I nodded. "No, it isn't. But it's not impossible either." He searched my face for something: reassurance, affirmation, understanding. I gave him a soft smile, hoping it could carry the weight of what I couldn't say aloud. "Do you think we can do this?" he asked, the vulnerability in his voice raw and unpolished. I hesitated, then nodded. "I think we have to try. What we've built isn't ordinary. Distance doesn't erase it. It just tests it." He took my hand in both of his, squeezing gently. "Then we'll navigate it together." We lingered for a moment longer, taking mental snapshots of each other, of the subtle expressions and familiar details that had grown precious over our time together. The announcement for boarding came, but neither of us moved immediately. We were tethered by presence, unwilling to let go too quickly. Finally, he leaned closer. "Text me when you get home," he whispered. "I will," I promised. And then the inevitable came. He walked toward the gate, every step stretching the space between us. I watched until he disappeared into the crowd, leaving behind a silence that felt both heavy and full. Back in my apartment that evening, I reflected on everything we had experienced. 10 hours on a plane had sparked a connection. Months of messages and calls had nurtured it. Visits had transformed it. And yet, none of it was guaranteed to survive the distance that lay ahead. But the beauty of it, I realized, was in the choice. Every message, every call, every moment spent together, whether in person or apart, was a conscious decision to care, to stay present, to invest in something intangible yet profoundly real. Love, I understood, does not demand proximity. It demands intention, and ours was unwavering. As I set my phone on the table, a message pinged. It was him. "Good night. No matter the miles, you're still here with me." I smiled, tears threatening to fall. Distance had arrived, but so had hope, courage, and commitment. Our story, born on airplane mode, would continue, navigating time zones, borders, and uncertainty, because some connections are too real to let go. Some love stories do not require immediate closeness to be true. They require trust, honesty, and the willingness to meet fully, even when the world insists you remain apart. And in that truth, I found peace. Would you hold on to love that requires patience and effort across miles, believing it can survive?